Welcome, everyone, to the City Club of Eugene's April 1st, 2022 program, Landlords and Tenants, What's Fair? I don't know if you feel very good about being here on April Fool's Day, but so this is the 25th program in our 2021-22 programming year. I'm Kitty Piercy, and I'm the City Club President, and proud of it. Support for the City Club is provided by our members and sponsors. You can become a member of the City Club at our website, cityclubofeugene.org. This program is live streamed to our YouTube channel and archived there, and on our Facebook page. Our podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Programs are broadcast on public radio station KLCC on Monday nights at 7. We have both business and in-kind sponsors. Our diamond sponsors are Kaiser Permanente, University of Oregon, Peace Health, and Lane Community College. And we get generous support from the City of Eugene and from Lane County. Our format today includes a question and answer period with City Club members and non-members alike via live stream and text. The texting number to submit your questions will appear at the bottom of your screen during the intermission and the question and answer segment. Speakers for today's program, Landlords and Tenants, What's Fair, are Julia Boss of Julia Boss Editing and member of the Eugene Housing Policy Board, and Catherine Dunn, Realtor from Keller Williams Realty. Biographical information on our speakers is available on our website, cityclubofeugene.org. I would like to thank John Belcher for coordinating today's program. So, 53% of Eugenians who are renters know that our community is a tough place to find housing. Rent Cafe reported that in 2021, Eugene had the most competitive rental market in the United States, with a rental vacancy of just 1.6%. When a unit comes on the market, 30 or more applicants competed for that unit, with only one signing a lease within 24 days of that listing. Even though the median gross rents went up 6% in the last 3 years, it has not slowed the race to rent. Additionally, the pandemic has hit both renters and landlords hard. In the face of renters' lost employment income, eviction moratoriums were put in place. To provide relief for landlords' lost rental income, the Oregon legislature established a landlord compensation fund. The Oregon Emergency Rental Assistance Program, intended to help low-income households pay past due rent, was plagued with slow payouts. All in all, the market grew tougher for landlords and renters. The Eugene Housing Policy Board's Rental Protection Committee recently submitted to the Eugene City Council a list of 9 new recommendations for additional renter protections. The recommendations fall into 3 groups: application deposit rules, move-out and eviction rules, and an increase in the rental housing code door tax paid by landlords to cover the cost of hiring a rental housing navigator, establishing a tenant hotline, and increasing other tenant support services. Our speakers today will offer their perspectives on these proposed rental protections. And right now, I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, Madam President. Our first speaker is Julia Boss. She is the principal of Julia Boss Editing. She's currently a member of the Eugene Housing Policy Board and was instrumental in developing these proposals from its Rental Protection Committee. She's also on the Eugene Community Development Block Grant Advisory Committee, and she has a BA and multiple MAs from Yale University in History and Renaissance Studies. So let me introduce Julia.
Okay, thanks very much to the City Club, and thank you, John, for the introduction. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today on these important proposals to protect Eugene renters. And thank you also to Catherine Dunn for being part of this conversation. So I will say before I get started that I'm not an attorney or a housing policy professional. I serve as one of 6 at-large community members on the Housing Policy Board, but I am today only speaking for myself as someone who cares very much about housing policy in Eugene. So I've had a chance since early 2020 to spend dozens of hours, probably hundreds of hours at this point, listening to renters and landlords talk about consumer protections for renters in Eugene. What I've been hearing on the renter side sounds like this. I was desperate. I was homeless. I thought I would be homeless. I slept on a porch. I lived in my car. I camped out in my grad employee office. I had a no-cause eviction and only 30 days notice and didn't know that was illegal. I had to get a lawyer to get my deposit back. I had 60 days to find an apartment, and I didn't get approved until day 59. I have rats in my walls. I just need to keep a roof over my head, over the head of my children, over the head of my disabled children, my disabled veteran parent. On the landlord side, I've heard, I'm very hardworking. I am well-intentioned. I try to do the best I can for my tenants. I've heard some landlords worry that any regulatory change right now will be the straw that breaks the back of their particular camel. And I've heard from more than one Eugene landlord who told me that they are, quote, making money hand over fist. One landlord told City Council recently that what she really wants is for her tenants to just talk to her. And so what I'm hoping that we can do today is to recognize that Eugene tenants are talking to landlords and to the rest of us. And what they're saying is that their current circumstances are untenable, and they're asking to make the landlord-tenant transaction just a little bit fairer. So we have to approach any question of fairness within context, some basic facts about the Eugene rental market, some of which we have just heard, but they deserve repeating. 53% of Eugene residents are renters. That's more than 90,000 people. A small percentage of these renters are students. Others are seniors. They are the workers who now deliver Eugene's essential services. They are the children who will make Eugene's future. Though they are working very hard, many current renters will never be able to buy a house, and especially not as the median listing price for a house in Eugene just hurtled past $460,000. According to City of Eugene data, 58% of Eugene renters are cost burdened. That means they pay more than 30% of their monthly income on housing. That is an entire Autzen Stadium full of people who are paying more for their rent than they should have to. At least a third of renters in Eugene are severely cost burdened, paying more than 50% of their income for rent. The median renter household in Eugene is $32,000 a year. The HUD calculated fair market rent, so that's 40th percentile of typical rents in a particular region, for a two-bedroom unit in the Eugene Springfield area is now $1,254 per month, or just over $15,000 annually. So to qualify for that two-bedroom unit under landlord standard screening criteria, that median renter household would have to be earning more than $45,000 per year. Now that same HUD statistic for a two-bedroom in Eugene Springfield in 2018 was $967. That's a 30% rent increase since 2018. And we've seen a 55% rent increase on that comparable unit since 2012. So I won't repeat that Rent Cafe just said we're really competitive, but I will point out that while the Eugene vacancy rate is now 1.6%, the state Oregon vacancy rate is 4.5%. And then our final little piece of context, which is about housing value, the value to owners of houses in Eugene. Eugene housing prices went up by 20% last year, And nationally, we've just seen a slew of homes earned more than jobs headlines after the average U.S. house price went up by more than $52,000 in 2021. So as we consider that huge increase in owner equity in a single year, let's go back to that average renter household income in Eugene of $32,000 per year. So what's fair, given all of the above? What can we fairly ask Eugene landlords to do to reduce the strain on renters? What consumer protections might we require within the transaction that is nearly every renter's largest financial transaction that they make in any year? So in 2019, the City Council asked Eugene's Housing Policy Board to answer this question. The Renter Protections Committee was created to, quote, identify priority tools and strategies to protect renters and prevent displacement in areas with changing housing market conditions in Eugene. So the handout that you have in front of you summarizes the recommendations that emerged from that process. And you can also find this at the city website under Renter Protections Process. So within that Renter Protections Committee, which was roughly evenly divided between landlords and tenants or renter advocates, renters identified consumer protection regulation as a crucial tool, and particularly recommended ways to protect renters in their transitions between tenancies, which is the moment when renters, and particularly lower income renters, are the most vulnerable to becoming unhoused. So some of these recommendations have long been the norm in other jurisdictions. Some are now being implemented in other cities as we respond to a major West Coast housing crisis. So these include items like ban or limit application and screening fees, process applications in the order they are received, limit the use of credit scores and medical or educational debt to deny applications, loosen income screening requirements, put a ceiling on security deposits, because there isn't one in Oregon right now, improve documentation of property condition at move-in and move-out, allow the tenant to access a formal rental payment history before they have given notice. So landlords proposed, additionally, a city housing navigator and that funding be increased for a tenant support hotline, and the Housing Policy Board recommended that these be paid for by raising the rental housing code door tax, which was set at $10 per unit per year in 2004 and has never been increased. And then relocation assistance finally has been added to the group of proposals as they have moved forward from Housing Policy Board to the City Council. So the logic behind some of these is really obvious. I mean, if we talk about loosening the income to rent ratio, we are basically right back at that capacity crowd at Autzen Stadium. The 58% of Eugene renters paying more than a third of their income for rent wouldn't qualify for their current housing if they applied for it again today. A baseline condition report, especially for older buildings, protects tenants from unreasonable withholding of security deposits on move-out. The majority of US states and many high-cost cities put a ceiling on security deposits, which is typically 1 or 2 months' rent. Surely that is also fair to ask of landlords who are doing business in a city with rapidly rising rents and a vanishingly small vacancy rate. I have, however, heard some questions about sort of how did we identify the problem? How do we connect a specific problem we've identified to the specific solution? So what I'd like to do in my remaining time is just walk through that on a couple of the issues. And obviously, I'm happy to answer questions about some of the other proposals during the question period. So the first place I'd like to start is with the key recommendation for first come, first serve application screening. The landlord or property manager offers the unit to the first applicant who meets the objective screening criteria. So this recommendation goes straight to the heart of the issue of fair housing. Identifying the problem starts with Eugene's 2019 Renter Experiences Survey. About a third of respondents to that survey indicated that they believed they'd experienced housing discrimination, and they listed legal source of income, disability, familial status, age, and marital or domestic partner status. The city's 2020 Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing report further suggests that some local landlords and large property managers in Eugene, quote, do not fully understand fair housing obligations. So next step, we discussed this issue in the Renter Protections Committee. One major Eugene property manager said that applying for an apartment is like a job application. So think about that. Job application, highly subjective process where everyone who applies is compared against everyone else who applies, and you look for the best candidate. More recently, we heard a landlord explain to the city council that they want to pick the applicant that they think can most benefit from access to their unit, whether or not that's the person who applied first. So the challenge here is that equity experts tell us about the unconscious bias that enters into that kind of subjective decision-making. The people who don't look like you, who don't speak like you, who don't love like you, those are the people who are going to end up at the bottom of the application pile. First come, first served processing is fair to tenants, especially those who are in classes specifically protected by fair housing law. It also protects landlords by directing them to a process that experts, and that would be experts from the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, to Fannie Mae, to apartments.com, all of those people are saying, landlords, this is the best way to make sure you are actually complying with fair housing law and that you can demonstrate that that's what you're doing. So then I'm just going to turn to one more item that's now before the City Council, which responds most directly to the original brief, the concern about displacement, and that is requiring that a landlord who issues a no-cause eviction pay relocation assistance to the displaced tenant. So we know that no-cause evictions are happening in Eugene. The Springfield Eugene Tenant Association recently reported they had received 54 reports of no-cause evictions between November 2021 and January 2022. So in a tight market with rising prices, we can expect some owners will sell. We can also expect that other units are going to do what's called filtering up, which is when the landlord decides they want to do a major renovation, raise the rent, bring in a tenant who can pay more. Relocation assistance doesn't prevent landlords from issuing a no-cause eviction if these are business decisions that the landlord decides to make. But a no-cause eviction is not a no-cost eviction. It's just that right now, the costs of a no-cause eviction are being borne entirely by the person or the family who are being displaced, or they're being externalized onto the community as a whole in the form of emergency shelter, increased hospital costs, and child welfare services. Relocation assistance can potentially defer or deter some of these no-cause evictions, and it can significantly help the displaced tenants as they suddenly have to pay for a new housing search and a move. So in conclusion, rising rents, 1.6% vacancy rate, that makes Eugene a great city to be a landlord. And landlords in a market that looks like that have tremendous power in one-on-one transactions with individual tenants. Municipal regulation has been part of getting us to where we are today by making it hard to build housing in Eugene and even harder to build multifamily housing in Eugene. Consumer protection regulation at the municipal level can also be part of making the renter experience in Eugene just a little bit fairer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Doss. Our other speaker is Catherine Dunn. Catherine has been a business owner for over 30 years. in both the advertising and real estate industries. She's a licensed realtor with the Canardy and Dunn Group at Keller Williams Realty, and she also invests in rental properties herself. She earned a bachelor's degree in advertising from the University of Oregon and additionally has a master's degree in organizational communication. Your turn, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to be here. Thank you, everybody, for allowing me to come speak. I'm Catherine Dunn. I'm going to be speaking on the in opposition of the proposed renter protections, because I think that these regulations will harm renters and landlords. I'm a former renter myself. Everybody is, really. I rented from the time I was 17 years old to 38 when I bought my first house, and now I also own rental properties. In fact, that's my retirement plan. I've been renting properties for 25 years now. I know how tough it is. First of all, in the early years, my rentals rented for less than the mortgage. And I was fine doing that at the time because I had a full-time job and I didn't mind putting $100 or $200 a month toward the rentals for the future. But over the years, and I've been doing this for 25 years, as I mentioned, over the years, the rents really didn't go up that much until recently. And now we are actually seeing cash flow for the first time. In the meantime, you know how many roofs I've put on over the past 25 years? A lot. I'm putting 2 on this year. I'm putting 2 on. I put 2 on last year. There's a ton of improvements that have to be made to houses over the years. You have to maintain them. You have to eventually put new HVAC systems in, new roofs, often carpets, new flooring. It all costs money. And landlords are not rich. I can speak for that myself. There might be some landlords who are rich, maybe if all their mortgages are paid off, but I don't have one of my mortgages paid off, and I am making some money. Yes, now I am. And that's my right to do that. I invested in my properties over the years, and I work hard at that. And I know you say work hard, you hear landlords say work hard. And you know why? Because we're nice people. We don't want to complain. In fact, we've had this discussion among landlords. We don't want to bring up all the complaints about renters. It's negative. But now that that's raised, I want to let you know, I just went through all these improvements on my houses. Over the past 2 to 3 years, I've had to remodel and update 5 rentals. Last year, I spent $105,000 because of work that needed to be done because of how renters left our houses. And this is the first time actually that we've had problems with renters over the past 2 years. I'm pretty good at picking out renters and having them take care of the house. But anyway, I'd like to protect my nest egg, and I'm sure you'd like to protect yours. And we have to be fair to landlords about this because they're taking a huge risk renting their properties. So I want to share with you some slides here. I'm going to share my screen. Hold on one second. Okay. I believe that landlords and tenants should be on the same side. Landlords have a place to rent. Tenants want a place to rent. All landlords want are good tenants who will take care of their property, pay rent on time, and stay for the long term. When there's a good match between landlord and renter, it's a win-win. But landlord regulations, as I call them, are taking away landlords' right to find good matches. Landlords are being treated unfairly. Eugene City Councilors are considering landlord regulations based on unverified renter complaints. We've heard a lot of complaints, but we have not verified those. There's always 2 sides to every story. They're also making complaints based on biased committees, invalid research. We rely on city officials to make sound legal decisions based on facts, valid data, reliable research, and input from balanced committees. That's what we expect, and that's what we should be getting. Let's take a look behind the curtain at the board and committee that proposed these regulations to the city. The Eugene Housing Policy Board, HPB. They wrote the renter protections for the city to review and that we're considering. The HPB's mission, which is right on their webpage, is to increase the availability of affordable, decent housing for low income and very low income renters in Lane County. Clearly a group that's naturally biased. I mean, they're biased, but it's all in good. They're naturally biased. That's what they do. toward low-income renters, and if they're not representative of Eugene's entire renter population. The Renter Protection Committee was formed under the HPB. This is the second committee here. Underneath the HPB, there was a Renter Protection Committee, and the renters on that committee, the number of renter advocates, I should say, the number of renter advocates outweighed the landlords. Ms. Boss just said it was about half and half. No, it was not. It was 70-30, 60-40 at best. Over the years, it's fluctuated a little bit. No, they were always outweighed, the landlords were. And they did not agree on the proposals. The HPB and the RPC members didn't like the fact that they were not reaching agreement with the landlords. So what they did is they added more renter advocates in an effort to dilute the opinions of landlords. Now, I know this is hard to believe, but let me read a few excerpts of the HPB minutes to show the bias against landlords. On 2/1/21, Ms. Boss wondered if the RPC should have 3 landlords on it, which it did, and if they should include more renters. Mr. Van Lattingham said if they got rid of anyone, it should be Mr. Evans, since his high-end tenants are not the ones being advocated for. On 4/5/21, quote, the HPB had talked about too much landlord representation on the RPC and mentioned adding Tim Morris from the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association, CETA. Mr. Van Lattingham moved, seconded by Ms. Boss, to appoint Tim Morris to the RPC. The motion passed, so they added another renter advocate. On 6/7/21, Mr. Judd wanted to talk about HPB member composition. Mr. Cable, the head of the committee, told him they could talk about that offline. Ms. Boss said if the RPC continued, a facilitator would be helpful, as well as less landlords on the RPC. It's great that we have the HPB to advocate for low-income renters, but they're not the ones who should recommend regulations that will affect all renters and all landlords. Just the wrong committee to do that. Now let's look at the research used to write these regulations. The Renter Protection Committee did a renter experience survey, and they created it and distributed it. It was distributed primarily to low income and very low income renters. It was actually distributed at food banks and at listening sessions at community centers in lower income areas. It was on the city's website for 1 month, but they just did these surveys for 4 months. So it is clearly biased. And then there's the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association's hotline. They're identifying the number of calls that come in and the types of complaints from Eugene and Springfield renters. And over the past 12 months, they've only received 45 calls per month, which is 1.5 calls per day. If that's representative of Eugene's renters, I would say that we don't have much of a problem. The data being relied on is biased. It's not representative of the experiences of Eugene's renter population, and we're proposing these regulations over that entire population. So let's review a few of the proposed regulations. We can't do them all here, but I just picked out a few. The first are numbers 5 and then 8 through 10, which are intended to lower the barriers for tenants to qualify for rentals. Number 8 proposes capping application and screening fees at $10 so more people can apply and they can afford to apply. $10 would pay for 1 basic screening for 1 adult. So this will add extra costs for landlords. If they have multiple adults applying for the property, they need to do extra. And if they wanted to do a more in-depth screening, such as a criminal check, that would be extra. Number 5 prohibits landlords from charging a move-in deposit more than 2 times rent, including the security deposit and last month's rent. So if a landlord requires that last month's rent, that's their protocol, then they would only be able to charge a security deposit of 1 month's rent, which is not enough and would add risk to landlords. Number 9 prohibits landlords from using medical and educational debt to evaluate an application. It also prohibits landlords from requiring a credit score greater than 500. A 500 credit score likely indicates a person is unable or unwilling to pay their debts. This adds significant risk to landlords. Number 10 prohibits landlords from requiring gross income of more than 2 times rent, while 3 times rent has been common. So if a property rents for $1,200 rent, and that would require the gross income 2 times that, which would be $2,400 per month. Now look at that. 50% of income could be going to rent here. We just heard that more than 30% would be considered rent burdened. More than 50% would be severely rent burdened. So why would we want to encourage people, renters, to become severely rent burdened? Why would we want to make this a standard? What will happen when they receive their first rent increase? This is crazy. All of these are low standards designed to enable tenants who can't afford a property to actually qualify for it, putting the tenant, the landlord, and the community in harm's way. Now, numbers 7 and 11 prevent evictions. And the city is going to determine which one they pass because they won't be able to do both. Pick one. Number 7 requires landlords to pay displacement assistance to renters if they issue a legal no-cause termination. Now, legal currently means during the first year of tenancy, for an acceptable landlord reason, like they're demolishing the property, they're selling the property, rehabbing it, or a landlord or their family members moving into the property. So we already have laws in place about, terminating somebody for no cause. We can do that now during the first year, which actually is a landlord's last line of defense. If the people move into a property and they get the experience of them living there, and if they can identify that that's a bad tenant, they would want to eliminate that tenancy during that first year because they've identified that. Now, that doesn't happen most of the time. That's very rare. I've never had that happen, but it would be nice to have that in place just in case. So number 11 would go a step further than number 7 and put a local ban or moratorium on no-cause evictions. Now, Senate Bill 608, which just came into effect a few years ago, already prohibits most no-cause evictions, again, after that first year, and does require relocation assistance. So I don't think we need these additional local eviction protections. When you look at these proposed landlord regulations together in a chronological order, you can see that with each step, there's increased risk to landlords. Step 1 reduces the barriers to apply so more people can apply. Step 2 lowers the screening criteria to qualify. So landlords may be required to rent to somebody they feel would add significant or additional risk because they may not be able or willing to pay the rent. And step 3 prevents landlords from evicting a bad tenant. So once a renter is in residence, if you determine that you've got a bad tenant, it will be very difficult to get, maybe even impossible to get them out. These regulations will cause unintended consequences as well. And that's because they will cause increased costs to the landlords, increased risks to the landlords, and they will be more complex for landlords. First, there could be a reduction in the rental supply housing. Portland has already seen a 14% reduction in its rental supply. The reduction will come from independent landlords perhaps selling their units to reduce because of the risk and complexity they're facing. They just can't deal with it. They just want to get out of the business. And that's what's happening in Portland. Also, developers of multifamily properties may bypass Eugene. Before they come into a community and build, they're going to research the laws. And if they see that this is way too complex, because now they have to look at not only local laws, but the state laws, but state and federal as well, it's just a patchwork of laws they have to work through. And then there could also be a financial crisis for tenants and landlords. So for tenants who end up in housing they can't afford, and for the landlords who house them, and lawsuits against the city, as Portland has seen. So our landlords recommendations are these. The city should rely on Oregon landlord tenant law and focus its efforts on compliance with those laws. It does no good to add new laws when we can't get people to comply with our current laws. We also recommend the city increase the use of nonprofit organizations to help low-income renters find affordable housing and other helpful services. But the city or the public should pay for that, not landlords. It's not our responsibility to do that. We also recommend the city support landlords and promote the building of new rental housing to enhance supply. So that is my time for now, what I have, but I'd be happy to answer your questions. And I want to thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dunn. We have two first questioners because we sort of have a pro and a con here, and we have one from each side. The first questioner will be Jason Evans, who's the owner of Trio Property Management in Eugene. And Jason, you can ask your question of one or both of the original speakers. Are you ready, Jason?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Please ask your question.
Good afternoon. This question is for Ms. Boss. Good afternoon, City Club members as well. I was also a member on the Renter Protection Committee, and I am a local professional property manager that believes that property managers will actually grow from the implementation and additional ordinances. However, I'm here in hopes of preventing unintended consequences that will negatively impact tenants and applicants by the implementation of the proposed ordinances. I agree with Ms. Dunn, and I'm disappointed about the way the Housing Policy Board and Renters Protection Committee has been run. It felt like my participation was more of a formality rather than an opportunity to provide professional advice regarding helping low-income tenants and avoid creating issues with the rest of the market. Frankly, I'm also surprised that the city councilors are willing to pass ordinances that affect and or create problems with the already existing complicated Oregon landlord tenant laws, and that they have indicated that they are not familiar with those laws. As it becomes too difficult, risky, and costly for the private small landlords to manage, they will seek professional services or sell the vitally needed homes in the available rental pool. I have already seen this and have confirmed with my colleagues in Portland regarding 14% sell-off that was already mentioned. The major driver of the ordinances appears to be protecting and housing for the lower income sector of the market. However, after these ordinances are going to affect the entire market and therefore create negative impacts throughout as more housing is needed, what in these ordinances will help mitigate the loss of current rental inventory and increase overall housing inventory to keep people housed and encourage continued investment in our city? Thank you.
Thank you for that question.
Okay, that was a long question, so I will try to cover some of the issues that Mr. Evans has just raised. So I think the first thing that we need to do is address the question of cause and effect in terms of smaller landlords exiting the market. Now, there is a massive change afoot nationwide in the nature of who is a landlord. Giant corporations are getting into the single-family housing market. They're getting into the local renting market. The Wall Street Journal has been running articles about build to rent as the best way to make money for a giant corporation. They've also been talking about larger corporate owners moving in as Zillow decided to unload their, buy and flip business sector. So whether we like it or not, the older style of landlord practice, the mom and pop landlord practice, is diminishing. So city council staff ran the numbers based on people registered for the rental housing code, and they determined that units owned by smaller landlords, which they defined as owning 1 or 2 units, is 12% of the current stock. Now, most of those landlords have stories, those smaller landlords have stories very much like Catherine Dunn's story that they told us, that she told us. So the narrative is, I bought my house, and then I saved money for a down payment, and I bought another house, which I've used as a rental to supplement my income. That is not something that is possible for younger generations coming in. We're now talking about a scenario where someone might be having to save $100,000 in order to buy a rental property. And if you go on the housing market in Eugene right now and you look for something you want to buy as a rental property and you show up with a 25% down payment, it's a pretty good chance you're going to get pushed out by someone who either offers over asking price or comes in with a cash offer, because that's what the large investors are doing. So we don't, as a city, have the capacity to determine who our landlords will be tomorrow or 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line. What we do have the capacity to do is look at whether we have adequate consumer protections in place to protect the tenants who are going to be the tenants of those landlords. And you can't tell a giant corporation, you know, just be nice and try to do your best. You need to come up with specific guidelines. So let's see, another thing we might want to talk about would be, I think you raised the issue of complexity, which takes us into the territory of municipal versus state regulation. So we don't currently have a giant housing crisis in the state of Oregon. We have a housing crisis in specific urban areas in the state of Oregon. So those figures that I was quoting about rising rents in Eugene, so those same figures indicate that it is more expensive to be a renter in Eugene than across about 90% of America, but it is also more expensive to be a renter in Eugene than across 84% of Oregon. So saying that we are going to stay and wait for the state to act is not necessarily a very wise direction to take. And I think that I will further, since both Ms. Dunn and Mr. Evans brought up the question of composition of the Renter Protections Committee and the Housing Policy Board, the Renter Protections Committee was chaired by a landlord, and 3 of its members were among the larger, or in Mr. Evans' case, mid-sized property managers doing business in Eugene. If you have a committee in Eugene where 4 members are landlords and 6 members are not landlords, and maybe 4 of those people are current renters, which group is overrepresented on that committee? Landlords make up about 1% of the population of Eugene. So if you have a Renter Protections Committee that has more or less equal representation of landlords and tenants, you are looking at a body where landlords have tremendous power, especially when the chair is also a landlord. The process of getting to recommendations is a very different thing from the process of voting. And if you give a group a brief which says, figure out ways to protect tenants, and what emerges from that are parallel recommendations where the renters recommend a series of recommendations and the landlords recommend a series of recommendations, and both go forward for further consideration, you are looking at a process where both voices have been heard. Same thing at the Housing Policy Board. 6 voting members. 1 of those members was a current tenant at the time that the voting happened. 1 was a landlord. So possibly 2, actually I think 2 were landlords. So again, question, 6 Eugenians sitting at a table. Only 1 is a current renter. which group is underrepresented at that table? It's not the landlord. There might be other questions that were buried in that very long question/comment, but I think that's probably enough for me to say right now.
Thanks to both of you. Our second questioner is Timothy Morris, and he is the Executive Director of the Springfield Eugene Tenants Association. And again, either or both. Speakers, thank you.
Thank you so much. Does this work? Okay, cool. Thank you so much to the City Club for inviting me. I feel very honored that you extended an invitation to me, and thank you all for being here today on this Friday afternoon. It's beautiful outside, and I'm looking forward to stepping back outside. And thank you for hosting this this conversation. You know, over half of our city are renters, and these protections can and will affect the majority of our city. And being the landlord-tenant relationship is one of the least regulated markets that has one of the biggest impacts on our city's economy and our city services, like homelessness services. So my question also is for Julia. Sorry to bring you back up to the stage. As Catherine shared, everyone has been a renter once, but the rental market has changed over the course of the years, especially for some folks that have not rented for 20, 30 years. Right now, there are so many reasons for a tenant to leave their home, including unexpected no-cause evictions, having rent raised to unpayable costs, moving to locate closer to a job, or even senior citizens that are looking to downsize. My question to you is from both your presentation and from Catherine's presentation, there were a lot of high-level conversations, overviews of what's going on, and from Ms. Dunn's case in particular, a lot of hypotheticals or maybes that were happening. My question to you is, when a renter is moving, either here into the city of Eugene or moving from Eugene to another location in Eugene, what does that look like? What happens?
Okay, thank you, Tim, for that question. Okay, so I was a renter as an adult for about 30 years, and I looked for housing in a number of cities around the world and in Eugene. And I would have to agree, based on extensive experience as a person looking for housing with my family, I agree with the 71% of respondents to the Renter Experiences Survey who described a housing search in Eugene as competitive and stressful. And of course, we've just had Rent Cafe agree, except that if you're talking from the business side, a competitive market is a good thing. So why is this so stressful? Let's just take a kind of sample example. So let's say we have a couple, they already live in Eugene, they're not married, they have a 6-year-old. They earn $40,000 per year. They're looking for a 2-bedroom unit, which many people would say, okay, that makes sense. Parents, kid, 2-bedroom. They're already in trouble. $40,000 a year is not enough to hit that 40th percentile fair market rent in Eugene. So they can only look for the most sought after apartments and houses that exist in Eugene, which are the ones at the lowest levels below average rent. That's where we have the biggest shortage. Now, they're not going to meet property manager standards for that standard median 1,250 2-bedroom. They're also unmarried, and they have a child. They're already in 2 housing protection classes. People with children, families with children face more discrimination. Discrimination based on domestic partner status, marital status, discrimination. Are they a same-sex couple? Discrimination. Is one of them possibly not white? Discrimination. Does one of them have a credit score that is below 650? Because a lot of landlords now use 650 as a hard cutoff. You can have a perfect rent payment history for 20 or 30 or 40 years and still not have a credit score over 650, because people pay for housing first. Your credit score could be terrible because of medical debt. Your credit score could be terrible for all kinds of things you didn't choose. You know, we are a very weird country in saying that you can incur debt while actually unconscious. And then the debt you incurred while unconscious can prevent you from getting housing. This is not standard. And it's actually been proposed by advocates today, consumer protection advocates, that medical debt be removed from credit scores altogether. Okay, so forget those sort of screening criteria. Let's talk about screening fees. They're not married. They each have to pay a screening fee. That could be $50 each for every unit they want to apply to. There's no ceiling on security deposits in Eugene, and some landlords are taking advantage of that by saying, gee, they could be really big. How about 6 months? That is a number that came up in the Renter Protections Committee as a security deposit that is being charged right now. And interestingly, one of the landlords on the Renter Protections Committee thought that sounded like a good idea, because then you could ensure that, sorry, I will move out of the way. I'm talking to him, sorry. Oh, yes.
I just want to let you know.
Yes, sorry. Yes, all right, so there we are. So it's a very challenging process, and then at the end, you may also end up with getting a no-cause eviction and playing homelessness roulette.
So thank you very much, and we'll have questions for both of our speakers after the break. We take a 5-minute break and return for questions and answers. Thanks. All right, everyone, we're ready to do the question and answer period. We have 5 minutes, and people need to come over here to the, you want me to be here?
No, I think they want to hear Julie.
Julie here. Good. Okay. We have 5 minutes. That means brisk questions and brisk answers. So let's take the first question. Step up to the mic.
I have a question for Ms. Dunn. My name is Josh Caraco. I should probably give a disclosure that I was on an original Renter Protections Committee. I helped design that survey people are talking about. I also was the hotline manager for the Springfield Eugene Tenants Association, but I'm not involved in either of those things currently. I also have parents who are small-scale landlords in a different city. I just want to give disclaimers, but anyway, so I know a lot about what's going on.
Yeah,
My question for Ms. Dunn is purely, she made a comment that adding these protections would make it hard, if not impossible, to get rid of bad tenants. And the reason I ask about this question is because this policy is specifically targeted at no-cause evictions, which have nothing to do with tenants who break leases or damage property or don't pay their rent or do any number of things that are specifically defined in law as for-cause evictions. This law does nothing to get rid of for-cause evictions, so I want to know how you make the claim and where that comes from that this law would make it hard to get rid of bad tenants.
Okay. Looking to you for your answer.
Yeah. Well, when you're in the first year of renting to somebody, as I mentioned, you're getting used to who they are. I mean, you don't know who they are. You've done your best to qualify them. They move into your property, and now you've got a working relationship with them. And so if you identify that, hey, you might have a bad, I actually had this happen to me. I never evicted them though. But it ended up where I noticed that, first of all, the husband and wife split up. The wife was left in the house with the kids. That's not, you can't say anything about that. But what ended up happening is our property we had to hire contractors to come in and fix it afterwards. There were window locks broken. There was an addition put onto our deck for a barbecue. It went on and on and on. And it's like, I don't know if I could have really told that, except with my communication with the actual person who was sending the rent in, which is the lady of the house. But you identify somebody that, I don't want to continue after this first year with this person. It's just too risky. And it ended up being risky. I let her stay during that first year. I let her go past her first year. And when we went into that house, the reason she left was that she went back to school to be a nurse. And so she went to stay with somebody that she knew. And when we went back into that house, it was a disaster. In fact, we had to bring a construction crew in to fix it because we couldn't personally just do it. So that first year is important to do a no-cause eviction. And that just also means sometimes you want to do a no-cause eviction because you don't really want to give a reason or evict. It's not really an eviction, it's a termination. We're using the term eviction wrong in this whole conversation that we've been having, not just today, but through the time that we've been talking about these renter protections. It's not an eviction, it's a termination. It would be an eviction if they didn't want to leave and they refused to leave, and then we'd have to go down to the courthouse and evict them. So I think that's a last line of defense for landlords, is to have that first year remain where we can do a no-cause eviction. It would hurt the tenants if we evicted them for cause. That's why a lot of landlords use it.
We need to move. Is there time for? Thank you very much. Is there time for any more questions? Or are we done? No time. Okay. I'm sorry for everybody else, but we're out of time. So that's the way it worked out this time. No, you can't. You can't. You can't. And I do want to say this, but then I'm going to read the rest of my comments here. This is not a debate. This was questions and answers, each side presenting their point of view. The format of this is not a debate. So okay. So this has been our April 1st, 2022 program. Landlord and tenants, what's fair? Before we thank our speakers today, I'd like to recognize our diamond sponsors. Kaiser Permanente exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information is available at www.kp.org. University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, and reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. Get more information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Oregon, and beyond as your hometown healthcare partner for more than 80 years. The Peace Health mission is to help you and your family healthy. Learn more at peacehealth.org. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. We are grateful for the generous support from the City of Eugene, and from Lane County, I'd like to acknowledge our Ruby sponsor, Johnson & Johnson, Lucas & Middleton. Support to the City Club comes from Johnson & Johnson, Lucas & Middleton, a team of experienced, compassionate attorneys fighting for justice. If you have been seriously harmed by wrongdoing and need help, contact us at justicelawyers.com. Today, gold sponsors are Sacred Earth Botanicals and Network Charter School. Thank you to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, PAC Info, and Simplified Computing, LLC, Dotson's Photography. Special thank you to public radio station KLCC FM 89.7 for airing City Club's programs on Mondays at 7. Our programs are always available on our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and our podcast. We invite everyone, members and non-members, to participate in our programs in person at our new venue, the First United Methodist Church at 1376 Olive, or by live stream on our YouTube page. More information is on our website, cityclubofeugene.org. Next week, we will ask the question, how important are jobs to overall well-being in our conversation? The Great Resignation and the Great Awakening. What workers want and need today. More details and information about future programs can be found online at the City Club's website, cityclubofeugene.org. I want to thank our guests today. Turn the page. Julia Boss and Catherine Dunn for a great program. Lots of good information for people to consider. This concludes today's program. Go out and enjoy the sunshine.